It's the Big E Sports Extravaganza.
It's a tradition.
Your weekly destination for all things going on in the sports universe. We don't just talk X's and O's. We go beyond them. Bringing you some of the most engaging guests from around the nation. Fasten your seatbelts. It's showtime. Now, here's your hostess with the mostest, Elissa Walker Campbell.
Hey, Elissa Walker Campbell, welcome back to the Big E Sports Show as we continue to get you ready for Week 16 of the NFL season, a week where margins are thin, the pressure is real, and playoff positioning hangs in the balance. And this weekend, the Steelers enter at 8-6, and they face a critical road test against the Detroit Lions. This is a matchup that could define how the season ultimately is remembered in Pittsburgh. So here to help us unpack all what is at stake and also discuss the bigger picture surrounding the Steelers, their head coach, Mike Tomlin. We are joined by longtime Pittsburgh reporter and author John Harris. He has a new book out, Tomlin, The Soul of a Football Coach, which offers a deep and timely look at one of the NFL's most respected and debated leaders. John, it's good to have you on the show for the first time.
I'm excited to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Well, we're looking forward to shining the spotlight on your brand new book, but let's talk about the Steelers. Here they are, Week 16, and they stand at 8-6, and they will roll up their sleeves and get to work against the Lions on the road. So with playoff positioning on the line, what truly is at stake for Pittsburgh in this matchup?
It's a big game for them. They have a little wiggle room. If they could win this game,
okay,
I would say they would pretty much almost wrap up winning the division, the AFC North. It's a big game. They have two other big games coming up after that, but Detroit's going to be hungry too. Detroit needs this win to stay in the playoff race, and it's in Detroit. The Steelers are not the greatest road team, so to me, it's an intriguing matchup. Both teams have a lot to play for.
Well, what about Detroit in this matchup that concerns you the most from Pittsburgh's perspective?
Their offense.
Okay.
Their offense it's dynamic. And the Steelers' defense has had its moments. They played a great game on Monday night against Miami in the cold in Pittsburgh. This will be in the climate-controlled dome in Detroit. They have a lot of weapons offensively, and the Steelers have – you never know what – put it this way, you never know what Steelers' defense is going to show up. And hopefully for the Steelers' sake, the defense we saw last week will be in Detroit.
John, what were your expectations coming into the 2025 season when we talk about the Steelers?
Well, I knew they were going to be competitive. They always are under that Tomlin. A lot of changes in the offseason, and so there was waiting and anticipation to see what would come from those changes. I was kind of expecting a typical Steelers season where they are right now, maybe 10, 11 wins. The difference this year, anticipation-wise, was not that the Steelers may make the playoffs and have a winning season, but that if they make the playoffs, that they win a playoff game. They haven't won a playoff game since 2016, which kind of explains why fans a couple weeks ago were calling for Mike Tomlin to be fired at a home game following a loss to Buffalo. So the anticipation is that a good, typical competitive Steelers season, but this time taking it to another level.
You're listening to the voice of John Harris. He is the author of Tomlin, The Soul of a Football Coach. And we're going to hit on his new book here just momentarily. But I got to ask you, when we look at this matchup with the Steelers and the Lions, win or lose, what will this game reveal about just the Steelers' identity heading into the postseason?
I think if they win, or if they really play well, it will show that maybe they regain that consistency that a team needs, especially late in the season. That's when we start looking at the teams that will do well in the playoffs and maybe go to the Super Bowl. Who gets hot late? Who plays consistently well? The Steelers played two strong games the past 2 weeks, but now they go on the road against a very good team. If they can play the same way, continue their running game, keep Aaron Rodgers clean and off the turf, that will show me a lot. Mm-hmm. And if the defense can clamp down and stop the run, which has been one of their weaknesses this year, so if I'm a Steelers fan, that's what I'd be looking for, the run defense and keeping Aaron Rodgers healthy and keeping his uniform clean.
Well, let's transition and talk about your new book, Tomlin, The Soul of a Football Coach. And you have covered Mike Tomlin for nearly 2 decades. You explore who he is beneath the surface. And as you're in a critical stretch right now. What do you think people misunderstand about him the most as a leader?
I guess it's because even though people love the way he talks and his personality, he's still very reserved. People don't know a lot about him. He's not in commercials. You don't really see that much about him. His personal life is personal. So there's still a lot of intrigue about him. And I think people look at him as a great coach. The players gravitate to him. Players around the league, they all want to play for him. And he's seen as this really great guy that knows how to communicate, very sharp, very smart. I think one of the things that he's done to me that maybe he didn't do earlier in his career, remember, he's on his 19th consecutive season as the Steelers head coach, which is incredible in itself, never having had a losing season. I think, though, that he's maybe given up a little bit of control in the sense that turning things over to other people, where in the past maybe he had more control over how things were done. And I think that's maybe where the transition is right now. What do? I got rid of my offensive coordinator 2 years ago. I brought in Arthur Smith. Terrell Austin is my defensive coordinator. I've known him for a long, long time. Do I maintain and keep that control that I had at one time when we were really successful? Do I try to take some of it back? Or do I continue to trust the people that I bring in and put in these important positions? And I think as we go down the stretch, these last few games will show us a lot. Is he willing to, I don't know, maybe relinquish some of that power and control that he's had for so many years?
You know, John, you framed this book around one central question. I mean, just who is Mike Tomlin? How would you answer that?
As his brother Ed Tomlin describes, he's a gym teacher. He's a football coach. Because there's been the question that if he stopped coaching, he'd be a natural for television. He has that voice, that personality. His brother said maybe it'll happen, because who knows? If they throw $15, $20 million a year at it, you can't say no to that. But his brother believes that he's just a football guy. That's who he is. That's the core of who he is. And I think that's what people need to know. He loves football. It's what makes him. His mother wanted him to be an attorney. She was not happy when he became a football coach. He started out at VMI, making not even $10,000 a year. Really sharp guy, very smart, very intelligent. But at his core, he's a football guy. He played football in high school at William & Mary. He's one of their best all-time wide receivers. And he's a football guy. And he loves players that are football guys. So at his core, he loves to get to know his players, what makes them tick, what makes Mike Tomlin tick, football. It's football and football. He's 53 years old. He could coach another 20 years easily, I think.
Well, and Chapter 9 details how Tomlin got the Steelers' job. Why was it just important to put that story on the record?
Well, I was in Pittsburgh at the time. I had just covered Bill Cowher's last season. He had stepped down. So that offseason was crazy because the Steelers were looking to hire a new coach. And the candidates included Russ Grimm, who was the offensive line coach at the time, Ken Wisenhunt, who was the offensive coordinator, Ron Rivera, who eventually became the head coach at Chicago with Washington. And the initial story was that Russ Grimm was going to get the job. It was reported as such. My paper at the time, the Pittsburgh Tribune Review, reported that. Everybody thought, okay, all of a sudden this guy, Mike Tomlin, who nobody really knew, comes out of nowhere, and he's hired. And so we, at the time, the Trib, we looked like we had egg on our face because we had reported that Mike Tomlin, that Russ Grimm was going to get the job. So many years later, there's no speculation of what really happened. So I discovered a year or so ago, in talking to Terry Robisky, who was a longtime NFL assistant, that we were actually right initially, even though we were wrong. That Terry Robisky and Russ Grimm were very close. They worked together in Washington. under North Turner. And when Russ Grimm ended up going to Pittsburgh and Bill Cowher stepped down, but the Steelers actually offered Russ Grimm the job. And Russ Grimm, in turn, who was very close to Terry Robisky, offered to make him the assistant head coach. And Terry Robisky was very excited about that because he had gone from Washington and he was now in Cleveland. And a day later, Russ Grimm finds out Dan Rooney, the owner, the late Dan Rooney, had a change of heart. He was in charge of what was known as the Fitzpatrick Alliance. And the Rooney Rule was named after him, actually. The Rooney Rule was to create opportunities for minority candidates, women, for head coaching and front office positions to have the opportunity to interview for positions. And Dan Rooney felt an obligation because of his status in the Fitzpatrick Alliance. He told the Steelers management, his sons, the other owners, I've had a change of heart, and I feel an obligation to give Mike Tomlin his chance. It's called the Rooney Rule. I'm Dan Rooney, and that's what happened. Russ Grimm calls Terry Robisky with the bad news, and they don't get the job. And Russ Grimm goes on to Arizona with Ken Wisenhunt, who had, after not getting the Steelers job, became the head coach of Arizona. They left Arizona a couple of years later, went to Tennessee. And after that, Russ Grimm was kind of never heard from in the NFL, never got another chance to interview for a head coaching position. And that's how it happened. And I just thought it was interesting to complete that story because when I wrote the initial book, that was still up in the air. People really weren't sure exactly what happened. Is it what people speculated that Dan Rooney decided to give him or hire Mike Tomlin because of the Rooney Rule? Or did they just feel like he was the guy for the job? And I think it's a combination of both.
Mm-hmm.
I think they felt there was an obligation to do it. Now, here's the deal. I guess the argument is that, okay, was that fair or not fair? I think if Mike Tomlin had gone in to Pittsburgh and had not won a Super Bowl in his second year and 2 years later gone back to the Super Bowl, yeah, I think that whole thing could have blown up. But was it a failure? No, I think it was a success from that standpoint. Now, the last few years have not equaled those early years. And that's where a lot of the fan frustration is coming from, that the team does not have the same level of success, postseason success, as they had in the early years. But I don't see that the hiring, initial hiring, I thought it was a great hire, but there's always, 2-3 sides to every story, right?
Yeah. It's interesting. When I think about Mike Tomlin, it just seems like he has spent so much of his career having to prove himself more than other coaches. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think it's a quiet, subtle thing, and he's not one to really talk about it a lot. I talk about it in the book. I have my observations as a reporter there, watching every day, going to press conferences, going to the games, listening to reporters' questions, how he interacted with things. I kind of explain a lot of that. I kind of explain, some of the dynamics of race as it impacted my time at the Pittsburgh Tribune Review. Was one of the few, the only black sports writer there at the time. And I think that's all in the book. I mean, you learn about a little bit of the history of Pittsburgh, the history of the newspaper rivalry between the Tribune Review and the Post-Gazette, Mike Tomlin stepping in as a black coach in the city of Pittsburgh. And even now, to this day, there are still fans and members of the media in Pittsburgh that don't want him there, that feel like, he's outlived his usefulness, and let's bring in somebody else, anybody else. Let's just get 19 years, right? That's a long time. It's a long time to find the warts and faults that you might have in anybody. And I think after 19 years, people say, okay, get us back to the Super Bowl. Get us a Super Bowl win or get us a playoff win, and you'll be okay. But if you go into the playoffs again, lose in the first round, we're not going to be very happy.
Well, you said it earlier, John, talking about that Mike Tomlin, he is only 53. He could coach another 20 years, but just how rare is that? Just the longevity that he has had as a head coach in the NFL, especially in today's NFL.
Oh, yeah. It speaks so much to the Steelers. We have it's a very interesting organization. I don't think he would have, if he had gotten any other job, I don't think he would have been there 19 years straight. Most coaches aren't there, right? 19 years straight, right? They
right.
Get there, and if they do well, they stay. But even you look at a team like Philadelphia, which won the Super Bowl, fired a coach after winning the Super Bowl 2 years later, then brought another coach in, and then he won a Super Bowl. So even teams that are successful, that win at the highest level, there's not a lot of for a head coach to know that you can stay somewhere for that long, 19 years. That's why I don't think he's that eager to leave. Because are you going to find another organization like that where the general manager is going to not want to take control of personnel decisions and not allow you to have that? And also, does he want to go to another team that doesn't have a quarterback, which has probably been the biggest problem over the last few years since Ben Roethlisberger retired? Mike Tomlin and the Steelers have not had that franchise quarterback, so there's been a lot of scrambling, a lot of ups and downs. So I think if he was going to leave or if the Steelers were going to let him go, he'd be looking at a team that has a quarterback of some level who you can build your team around.
We are winding down our time with our very special guest, John Harris, the author of Tomlin, The Soul of a Football Coach. And my final question for you is, what do you hope readers walk away from understanding Mike Tomlin after reading your book?
I think the fascinating thing to me was the early part of it. I didn't know that much about him. I just knew he coached the Steelers. But I really get into his early years. He paid his dues. He coached at small colleges, assistant coach, VMI, University of Memphis, Arkansas State, University of Cincinnati. So he grinded. He was he was not at the big major programs. He learned how to coach. He learned a lot of responsibility at a very young age. Dan Quinn, the coach at Washington, was actually talked a lot about that. Dan Quinn helped him get a job at VMI, and he paid his dues. He did the film work. He did the studying. He worked with the players, communicated with the players. Got a lot of responsibilities at a young age that a lot of coaches don't get, which, kind of resulted in him getting a head coaching job at 34. He gets his big break. He goes to Tampa Bay under Tony Dungy. They win a Super Bowl. He's coaching the defensive backs. And then Brad Childress gives him the opportunity at Minnesota to be a defensive coordinator for a year. So I think what people will take from it is it was a long and winding road for him. So even though he got the head coaching job at 34, he had been a coach since the moment he left William and Mary as a player. He paid his dues in that regard. And I think people will find that aspect of his career fascinating.
Good stuff. John Harris, the book is Tomlin, The Soul of a Football Coach. Insightful, timely, and a must-read for all Steeler fans or NFL fans. John, thank you so much for joining us, and enjoy the game this weekend, Week 16, as the Steelers take on the Lions.
Thank you so much.
You bet. Stick around. Much more coming your way right here on the Big E Sports Show. Join us on X at eRadioSports, and we will be right back.